Dragon Quest VII Reimagined is not a 100-hour game. Is that good or bad? Well, let's talk about it. Howdy, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon, and thanks to Square Enix for providing the review key for Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, I was able to play this game through to completion. I had settled in for what I was sure was going to be a long and difficult experience, because that's more or less the reputation the original game made for itself. What I got was, well, not that. But that's not a bad thing at all. In fact, Dragon Quest VII Reimagined provides the lowest barrier to entry for any series fan who's been too intimidated to tackle this particular title. Like me, I'm that type of fan. Seriously, I've had the 3DS version sitting in my collection untouched for years, because while I always aspired to be the sort of person who would invest 100 hours in a super difficult, super old school JRPG, I have to be honest, I'm just not that cool. So how long is Reimagined? We'll get there. For now, let's take this one step at a time, starting with the story. With any Dragon Quest review, you sort of have to divide the story section between the story and the stories, plural. That's because Dragon Quest has done episodic storytelling for a long time. Every region you travel to has its own short story with its own beginning, middle, and end. Those stories don't typically feel super connected to the main story, meaning the big quest you're on, which is typically something really simple, like defeat the evil bad guy or, well, that's it, actually. That's kind of the big Dragon Quest story. So to be honest, there's never a ton of meat on the bones of that big overall story. On the other hand, Dragon Quest excels at telling these small, self-contained stories in each region. Dragon Quest always favoring short stories over long means that Dragon Quest VII really has an opportunity to shine, because never before has the short story collection structure of this series been more apparent than here. Your Keebler elf-looking hero and his friends Maribel and Kiefer suddenly find themselves with the ability to travel back in time, and it shakes their understanding of the world to its foundation. See, in their world, there is only one island in an enormous sea full of nothing else. But when they travel back in time, they discover a bunch of other islands filled with unique people, each one of them in some sort of trouble. These stories range from surprisingly deep and incredibly moving, all the way down to somewhat mediocre and kind of underbaked. Fortunately, the scale is definitely tipped towards deep and moving. I'm not going to spoil any of the stories here, naturally, so I'll just say that fortunately, the mediocre stories do tend to be the shorter ones, so at least when you're in a plot you might not find interesting, chances are it won't last for very long. Dragon Quest VII really feels like a sort of template for what Dragon Quest could have been going forward, really leaning into that short story format. And yeah, naturally that format has continued, but not without a couple of really big swings in the form of Dragon Quest IX and X, but that's a story for another day. So the short stories are, in my opinion, the best thing about the storytelling in both the series at large and in Dragon Quest VII Reimagined in particular. So what about the overall story? I think of Dragon Quest VII as Yuji Horii getting the time travel bug after working on Chrono Trigger. I know there was some overlap in development of Dragon Quest VI and Chrono Trigger, but Dragon Quest VII is the first full game he wrote afterwards, and it definitely feels like his response to having worked on that classic. His take on time travel is a lot simpler than Chrono Trigger's, and I definitely prefer the Masato Kato influence over the Yuji Horii influence in Chrono Trigger, but you can tell Horii really felt inspired by that game here. You travel to the past to essentially resurrect a society, and this is a very cool idea with a capital I. However, I think some of Horii's less optimal storytelling foibles sort of show up here. After you save an island in the past, you can visit it in the present, and while the world is of course populated with different characters than you met in the past, there's really very little change to anything else. The houses and buildings are all perfectly identical with only a very few exceptions. It just feels like a missed opportunity, a dedication to keeping it simple that sort of leaves a bunch of potentially cool ideas on the table. It would have been much better to return to the present and find the modern islands completely different now that they've had the chance to develop over centuries. The overall story is, as usual, simple, but it has kind of a cool vibe to it that I really like. It's basically a post-apocalyptic story, a very Dragon Quest rendition of one at least. It actually kind of reminded me a bit of Zelda Wind Waker. I mean, obviously the emphasis on islands and sea travel is part of that, but even more so, it's the bright and cheery yet post-apocalyptic feel that's reminiscent to me. It's a very cool aesthetic, a post-apocalypse that doesn't realize it's a post-apocalypse. But yeah, it's a classic good versus evil story. It's not going to blow your mind. There are actually a couple of interesting but small twists along the way, which I appreciated, but as with most Dragon Quest plots, it's just there as the driving force to move you along. So, the stories are really very good, and the story is typical Dragon Quest. In other words, just kind of there. It's a series tradition at this point, you can't even really be mad at it. Now, let's talk about the characters, why don't we? Dragon Quests, or is it Dragon's Quest? Whatever. They're always full of charming characters designed by Akira Toriyama, rest in peace, and Dragon Quest VII is no exception. His designs do feel a little bit different this time, and that they're maybe a bit more on the super deformed side, like kind of chibi, if that makes sense. Also, I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. I kind of think all the characters are ugly. Like, every Dragon Quest game has one or two major characters who are super uggo, that's pretty standard, but I think all the characters are weird looking at best and ugly at worst. Some of it is related to how there are sort of two distinct types of characters this time around. There's the super deformed cartoony characters and the super deformed realistic characters. Like, let's compare Kiefer to the protagonist. They're ostensibly both 16-year-old boys, but while the main character looks like a cartoon character, Kiefer looks like Team America World Police. You know what I mean? But look, the physical appearance is only one tiny aspect of a character, and it's the least important part, in my opinion. Where these characters shine is in their personalities. The main character, I won't spend much time on. He wears green, and you can sometimes make him say yes or no in response to questions. He's a Dragon Quest protag. The end. Kiefer is the Prince of Estard and the main character's best friend. This really helps to show how tiny their world is when a prince is best buds with the son of a fisherman. Also, Kiefer's dad is named King Donald, and I don't know if it's just indicative of the time period this game was originally released in, but I think it's hilarious that their names are Donald and Kiefer. I'm guessing the Sutherlands were the most famous Hollywood father and son duo at the time or something. Anyway, Kiefer is brash and enthusiastic and really puts the pressure on you to go on an adventure. Then there's your childhood friend Maribel. I love Maribel, mostly because she's kind of a jerk. She's the sort of girl who makes you escort her to the next town over so she can sit and flirt with another guy right in front of you. But, of course, she has a heart of gold, and it's great seeing the breadth of her character play out over the course of the game. These three form the initial adventuring trio, though you pretty quickly run into Ruff. I don't want to say much about him because his backstory is pretty crucial to one of the island stories, but he rides a wolf and frequently functions as the comic relief. Aisha is a member of the Romer tribe whose job is to dance for a ceremony to resurrect the Almighty, basically the god of this world. She's like Kiefer in that she's got that more realistic face, and she's very focused on duty and honestly isn't the most interesting of the group in my opinion. And finally, there's Sir Mervyn, who gets special recognition just for being a JRPG character who is old. Like, he's a properly old man, and I love that. He's a little bit stuffy, but adding that dynamic to a team full of kids is actually pretty great. So, the characters themselves are a lot of fun overall, and despite me not really loving the way they look, I did feel pretty strongly bonded with them. I just honestly would have liked more growth for them. One or two of the characters do get a bit of growth, I mean kind of, but for the most part they stay pretty much the same from beginning to end. The game does try to create some opportunities for slightly more complex character moments, like having it look like a character is going to leave your party for complicated reasons, but it reneges on that within minutes and the status quo continues. It's so odd that honestly those few moments feel shoehorned in, like the writers realized they hadn't really done any character work and tried to squeeze it into the existing structure of the story. That's going to be a problem with a remake like this. There's a framework already put in place. I'm sure there's quite a lot different about this game compared to the PS1 and 3DS versions. Maybe there's better character work there? I don't know. Given the eras they came out in, I kind of doubt it. Another issue I have is the way the cast of characters is utilized in most scenes. Despite all your characters having personalities and voices, aside from the main character, of course, your team only very rarely interjects in scenes with other characters. There are plenty of scenes with your team talking amongst themselves, and those interactions are always fun and well written, but most of the other characters just talk at you. If that was a stylistic choice, I could almost accept it, but the thing is, it's not consistent. Sometimes your characters do interject in a conversation with other characters. It's just so rare that the cast feels like they almost don't need to be there. So it's good that the characters are unique and have their own personalities, but that differentiation doesn't really follow them into combat, at least not for very long. I enjoyed the combat in DQ7 Reimagined more than I think any other Dragon Quest game in recent memory. It's fast, it's fun, and I guess I'd gotten used to the old school style of Dragon Quest 1 through 3, where everyone inputs their commands at the beginning of a turn, because I was downright delighted when I saw DQ7 uses a more modern turn-based system, with characters getting the chance to input their command right before they take an action. That means no more wasted spells. I turned the battle speed up to max right away, and I'm happy to say that it doesn't come with the same downside that the other recent DQ remakes have. Specifically, I'm still able to read the text that pops up with every command. It's quick, but it's readable. In those other DQ remakes, I basically had to sacrifice being able to read the text in order to have the battles go at the pace I preferred. So that's already a big win in my book. The battle system at its core is traditional Dragon Quest, so if you've played any of the entries before this, you already know how to play. Reimagined adds a couple of features like characters having a random chance to get amped up, which is basically like a limit break in Final Fantasy. They can keep that amped up status for quite a while without using it, so you can often save it for when it's really necessary, and that's great. You can also mark skills and spells as favorites so you can quickly access them via the left bumper. I wanted to mention that because I didn't realize it was a thing until the final dungeon, and boy, I would have liked to have known that the whole game. I mentioned the speed option, which is a great quality of life feature. I think in general, this game is pretty player friendly, but there are a couple of what I would consider quality of life oversights I wanted to point out. First, it's weird that selecting a healing spell doesn't auto-select the character who's most in need of healing. Most JRPGs do that as a matter of course. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined will auto-select a character who needs healing, but not necessarily the one who needs it most. If the first character in your list has full health, it will jump to the next character, even if the character after that one is the one who really needs help. Another small but somewhat irritating issue I had was with the cursor memory. If you choose to have the cursor remember your selection, that's fine, that works as expected. But I wanted to have it forget so that I could be a bit more intentional about my choices. The problem is that the battle system places the amped up menu option above attack. And if you don't have cursor memory turned on, the cursor will reset to the highest spot on the menu, meaning the let loose command. I don't think that's really the behavior the player would be intending from choosing the forget cursor memory option. Attack is going to always be the default in that situation. That's real nitpicky, and I decided to just keep it on remember, and it was totally fine, but it's still an odd oversight. One big change to the combat this version adds is the field attack. You will see every enemy on the field, unless you're on a boat, in which case it's random battles. But running around on foot, you'll see the enemy, and you have a chance to hit them to do some initial damage. Unlike in most JRPGs with this mechanic, hitting the enemy on the field does not guarantee you any sort of turn advantage. In fact, they can still get the drop on you and attack first, even if you hit them on the field. So the only benefit, at least at first, is that you can do a bit of initial damage. However, as you level up, eventually you'll become strong enough that doing a field attack will just instantly win the battle. This will award you with a percentage of the experience and vocational points you would have received if you fought the battle in full. I want to say it's maybe around a third. I didn't study it scientifically, but it's a much smaller amount than you'd get if you fought the battle for real. However, if you're so inclined, it can be a really simple and stress-free way of grinding. Enemies will regenerate over time, so it's perfectly feasible to make laps around a particular map and one-shot every enemy, then return to your starting point and do it all again. Now, is that the most fun way to spend your time? Probably not. If you're in the mood for a more traditional grind, you'll have access to the whistle command to draw a battle instantly as soon as you recruit Rough, which isn't all that far into the game. This is a grinder's paradise, for sure. One quick note, not really important, but killing enemies on the field is fine and good. I appreciate having that option. But one thing that bugs me in a lot of games is when the game sets me up to feel like a psychopath. It happened in the new Super Mario Bros. Games where none of the enemies were trying to attack Mario. They're literally just walking around and dancing to the cheerful music, loving life. And here comes Mario just killing them for no reason. I mean, yeah, I did it. I stomped those Koopas because that's the game. But I didn't feel good about it. In Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, a lot of the enemies on the field aren't just walking back and forth boringly, they're doing cute or funny things. And here comes Gems just slashing away like a maniac. I slaughtered a tiger and all of her cubs as they frantically tried to drown themselves in the ocean to avoid the painful death of my vicious blade. I felt like a genuine monster sometimes playing this game. God help me. I did mention vocational points, so I should talk a bit about the game's main differentiator in the combat space, vocations. Every character begins the game with a vocation very specific to who they are. Your main character is learning to be a fisherman, so that's your vocation. Maribel is the daughter of the mayor, so she's a young mayoress. These vocations are leveled up as you fight battles, and gaining a vocation level gives you access to new abilities. Some abilities are completely unique to a particular vocation, and some can be found in multiple vocations, but you can only use a particular ability if you're equipped with a vocation that offers it. You unlock the ability to change vocations maybe 7 or 8 hours into the game, and not too long after that you gain the ability to moonlight, which essentially means equipping 2 vocations at once. Mastering vocations will unlock more advanced vocations with access to stronger abilities. The way you gain vocation levels is a bit odd, though. You'll always gain the same amount of vocational points regardless of how challenging a battle is. It's a different amount depending on if the battle is a boss fight, a regular fight, or a field attack. Boss battles give you 10 points, regular battles give you 5, and field attack kills give you 1. You can get a few bonus vocational points after every fight if your character is equipped with 2 vocations and one of them is mastered. Yeah, it's just a little odd. Like if you wanted to spend a little time using Whistle and plowing through super low level enemies to gain vocational points quickly, the game will absolutely reward you for doing that. It's not a recipe for a good time, but you can do it. And I think that's a problem, because JRPG players have proven, time and time again, if you give us a boring but simple way of accomplishing a task, we'll choose that over the more complicated but interesting way every time. It's drawing 100 spells from every enemy in Final Fantasy VIII. We can't help ourselves. So yeah, I fell victim to this a bit too. I put this out there just to encourage you to try and avoid falling into that pit. The battles are a lot of fun, but I will say, this is by far the easiest Dragon Quest game I've ever played. I don't think I died even once. That is unheard of for me with this series. Now, there are actually some pretty robust difficulty options you can adjust, and you can fine-tune it based on your playstyle, which is great. So when I say this game is easy, understand I mean it's easy on regular settings. If you're looking for a challenge, give yourself a challenge. I love the world of this game. It's so bright and colorful, and yeah, it's a Dragon Quest game. But in particular, the island setting really worked for me here. I love exploring castles. Like, exploring castles in Dragon Quest has always been a big deal because they've always been so complicated and maze-like. But Dragon Quest VII Reimagined really takes that to the next level. Like, I think they're in on the joke because at one point Maribel even comments about how it's so weird that castles are designed so poorly. But yeah, exploration is great. The game also features something I haven't really seen much of since like Lufia 2 on the Super Nintendo. Puzzles. There are some genuine like block puzzles, beam of light puzzles, like some real old school classic stuff. None of them were overly difficult, nowhere near the levels of frustration I would get from the aforementioned Lufia 2, but it was nice to have that sort of thing in a big JRPG like this again. It does seem like the puzzles are a bit front-loaded, though. There are quite a few in the beginning areas, and then they sort of peter out as the game goes along. I'd have loved to see at least one solid puzzle in each story segment, honestly. Having each area you explore be more or less self-contained means you really get familiar with a setting, even though you might only be there for an hour or two of real time. And each place is distinct enough, both in design and in things like character accents, that you'll be able to differentiate places pretty easily. Speaking of the accents, I want to take a moment to praise the writing. It's something I thought about a lot. Like, Dragon Quest is really goofy, isn't it? The writing is often extremely tongue-in-cheek. They might even call it cheeky. You know what I'm saying? But it's so good. I'm really curious how the original reads to Japanese players. Like, is it as quirky and weird to them as it's written for us? Either way, I'm glad we have what we have. I think it really makes the series stand out in a world populated with just so dang many JRPGs these days. I also love how this is a series where almost everything is a friggin' pun, a dad joke, and yet it has some of the most gut-wrenching, rip-your-heart-out emotional stories of any game on the market. And this game is no exception. There are some incredibly heavy plots and some dark events, but the game manages to balance being goofy and serious so well, as good or better than any series out there today. The writing is just phenomenal. The voice acting is very good, though there's not a ton of it. A lot of important story scenes are voiced, but I wouldn't say even all the important ones are. But all the performances are excellent, particularly Maribel. She's just such a great character, and her actress really brought her to life. Major props. The music it's Dragon Quest. A lot of the classic little ditties are here, as you'd expect. The music is very good, but there's not a ton of it. Still, I've had the town theme stuck in my head for like 2 weeks straight, and I'm not sick of it yet, so I guess they went with quality over quantity. If this were a 100-hour game like the original, I might have felt that the music wasn't up to par for a game of that length. But Dragon Quest VII Reimagined is not a 100-hour game. So the question remains, how long is it? I clocked in at 36 and a half hours. That's about a third of the length I've heard quoted by most people who played the original. Does that mean 2/3 of the content was cut? Or do the quality of life additions just speed up the gameplay that much? I can't say, having never played the other versions of the game. I can say that I have it on good authority that it took approximately 3 hours to get to your first battle in the original version of the game, while here, my timer was at about 50 minutes. Now, of course, there is some optional content that I didn't do in my initial playthrough. I've since gone back and started doing it, and I could see that adding a few more hours to the total runtime, probably putting it at around 40, unless you're a crazy completionist going for every single mini medal or things like that. But a 40 to 45 hour experience is probably what you can expect if you are interested in doing most of what the game has to offer. Honestly, I'd be really fascinated to hear from people who have played the original after you've had a chance to go through this version. Like, what is different? What was cut? Because there had to have been some cuts, right? Now, we do get a bit of new story content, specifically some stuff involving Kiefer, but I won't say more than that to avoid spoilers. I mean, you've probably seen the trailers, but still, I'm not going to expound on that. But even with the additional content, this is not a long game at all. And that's fine by me. Like I said, I was intimidated by this game for a long time. This is definitely the most easily digestible version. Is it the most definitive? I can't say. I think it's key that they didn't call it anything like definitive, right? They called it Reimagined. This is a new team working with Yuji Horí's blessing and input, recreating the story of Dragon Quest VII for a new audience. I do have some issues with it. You've heard me talk about them. But as with every other Dragon Quest game I've played, what ultimately sticks with me is just how cozy and warm and familiar it feels to play. I never once didn't want to be playing it. You know what I mean? I would think about playing it when I wasn't. I think when I connect with a game like this, it actually tends to make me a bit more critical because I'm really thinking about it. I'm not going to invent flaws that aren't there, but those flaws are going to be much more apparent to me. And this game has flaws, but they're superseded by my sheer enjoyment of the whole experience. Let me know down in the comments if you're planning to pick this one up when it comes out later this week. And if you've played the original and get through this one, maybe DM me on Twitter and tell me about the major differences because I'm really curious. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and thanks especially to everyone who's subscribed. I really appreciate it. Have a good day, y'all. Bye.